China just started building 5 dams inside one canyon in the Himalayas. Combined capacity, 60 gigawatts. That is almost 3 times the size of the Three Gorges Dam, which until last month was the largest power station on the planet. July 19, 2025. Ningxi, Tibet Autonomous Region. Premier Li Qiang presides over the groundbreaking ceremony for the Medog hydropower complex. Behind him, a river canyon, where the water drops 2,000 meters in a straight line. 2 kilometers vertical. That is taller than 5 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other. The Yarlung Tsangpo, downstream they call it the Brahmaputra, makes a horseshoe turn around the eastern Himalayas. Geologists call it the Great Bend. Engineers call it the single highest concentration of potential energy on Earth. The announcement got almost no coverage in the West. Meanwhile, India, which sits downstream on the Brahmaputra, said nothing publicly. This is not a concept. Groundbreaking happened. The project is real, it is funded, and it is underway. Estimated cost, 1 trillion yuan. That is 137 billion US dollars. Some estimates go as high as 167 billion. Planned completion, sometime after 2030. By then, those 5 dams will generate 300 billion kilowatt-hours per year. This one canyon will produce enough electricity to power Germany twice over. The Yarlung Tsangpo enters the Great Bend at about 3,000 meters above sea level. 50 kilometers later, the river exits at 1,000 meters. 2,000 meters of elevation loss in 50 kilometers. Most of that fall is concentrated in one section where the canyon tightens and the water accelerates into Class 6 rapids. The energy density there is unmatched. Nowhere else on the planet does this much water drop this far this fast in a geologically stable zone. The Himalayan bedrock here is Precambrian, some of the oldest, hardest rock on Earth. It is perfect for concrete and dams that will stand for 100 years. The Great Bend sits in Medog County in southeastern Tibet. Until October 2013, Medog was the last county in all of China without a road connection. Every other county, more than 2,800, had road access. Medog did not. Then China built the Galongla Tunnel, 3.3 kilometers long, drilled through solid Himalayan granite at an elevation of 3,000 meters. It opened in 2013, and for the first time in history, trucks could reach Medog year-round. That tunnel made the Medog hydropower complex possible. The complex is a cascade, 5 separate dams stacked along the same river, each one feeding into the next. Dam 1 sits at the upstream entrance to the Great Bend. Dam 5 sits at the downstream exit. Why 5 dams instead of 1? Because one dam tall enough to capture 2,000 meters of head would be an engineering nightmare. 5 smaller dams do the same job with a fraction of the structural stress. Each dam has its own powerhouse, its own turbines, its own transmission lines. The water that exits Dam 1 enters Dam 2. By the time the river exits Dam 5, it has turned turbines 5 times. That is why the total capacity is 60 gigawatts. The Columbia River in the United States has 14 dams in cascade, generating about 20 gigawatts combined. Medog will do 60. The challenge is the location. Medog is geologically active, seismically risky, and environmentally extreme. The Great Bend sits at the collision zone between the Indian tectonic plate and the Eurasian plate. Mountains are rising about 5 millimeters per year. Earthquakes are common. In 2020, a magnitude 6.7 quake hit less than 100 kilometers from the planned dam sites. Medog County gets more than 2,000 millimeters of precipitation per year, most during the summer monsoon. That means landslides, debris flows, and flash floods. Every year, sections of the highway wash out. China is building it anyway because the payoff is worth it. And tell me something. Where in the world are you watching this from, and what time is it there right now? Drop it in the comments. And subscribe if you're new. This is where the most extraordinary stories come alive. 300 billion kilowatt-hours per year. Most of it goes east to China's coastal cities via ultra-high voltage transmission lines. Over 2,000 kilometers, the longest power transmission in the world. But some stays local. Tibet has almost no heavy industry right now because it has almost no power. That changes with Medog. Suddenly you have 60 gigawatts of cheap, clean electricity in one of the least developed regions. You build aluminum smelters, data centers, green hydrogen production. China is not just building a dam, it is building the foundation for an entirely new industrial corridor in the Himalayas. 60 gigawatts of capacity requires 60 gigawatts of water flow. The Yarlung Tsangpo becomes the Brahmaputra when it crosses into India. By the time it reaches Bangladesh, it is one of the largest rivers on Earth. Hundreds of millions depend on it for drinking water, irrigation, and fishing. If China decides to hold back water during the dry season, the flow downstream drops. If China releases water during the wet season, the flow downstream surges. Either way, India and Bangladesh have no say. China already operates dams on the upper Yarlung Tsangpo, but those are small. Medog is 100 times larger. If India knows this, after the July groundbreaking, Indian officials were careful with their words. No direct criticism, just quiet statements about the need for transparency and data sharing on transboundary rivers. The Medog dams sit less than 200 kilometers from the Indian border, in a region where China and India have unresolved territorial disputes and a history of military standoffs. The Galwan Valley clash in 2020 happened just a few hundred kilometers west of Medog. Dams are civilian projects but also strategic assets. They control water, which means they control leverage. India has its own dams on rivers that flow into Pakistan. China is now doing the same thing at a much larger scale on a river that flows into India. China has said it plans to be carbon neutral by 2060. Medog alone will generate more clean electricity than the entire coal fleet of several European countries. If China can replicate the model along the Tibetan Plateau, the Mekong, the Salween, the Indus, all of them start in Chinese territory. Everything has to come in by road, and that road is a single two-lane highway that gets washed out every monsoon season. Concrete for 5 dams requires millions of tons of cement and aggregate. China is building cement plants on site. Aggregate comes from the canyon itself. They blast the rock and crush it on site. Water comes from the river. Steel for turbines, generators, penstocks has to be fabricated elsewhere and trucked in. Each turbine runner weighs hundreds of tons. The project will require tens of thousands of workers at peak construction. China is building entire temporary cities to house the construction crews. All of this happens at altitudes between 1,000 and 3,000 meters, in a region with landslides, earthquakes, and weather that shuts down work for months. The timeline assumes everything goes perfectly. It probably will not. But even if it takes 5 years longer than planned, it still gets built, because China has decided this is a national priority. The Three Gorges Dam, completed in 2006, was the largest power station in the world at 22.5 gigawatts. It took 17 years to build. Medog is almost 3 times larger, and China is attempting to build it in roughly the same time frame, in a location 10 times harder to access, at a cost up to $170 billion. Most countries do not attempt projects like this because the risk is too high and the political will required is rare. But China has the capital, the engineering capacity, the state control over land and environmental permitting, and the long-term planning horizon. At the same time as Medog, China is building the world's largest offshore wind farms, largest solar farms, largest battery storage facilities, and most extensive high-speed rail network. China is betting that the country that builds the most clean energy infrastructure in the 2020s and 3030s will dominate the global economy in the 4040s. There are environmental costs. Damming the Great Bend means flooding valleys, displacing communities, and altering one of the most biodiverse river ecosystems in Asia. The Yarlung Tsangpo Canyon is home to species found nowhere else on Earth. Chinese state media acknowledges this. The official line is that environmental assessments are ongoing and relocated communities will be compensated. Dams change water temperature, sediment flow, and seasonal flood cycles. All of that affects fish migration, agriculture, and delta formation in India and Bangladesh. India has raised concerns quietly, but quietly is the key word because loud objections would invite a conversation India does not want to have about its own dams on rivers flowing into Pakistan. So the conversation stays quiet and the construction continues. This is not just about hydropower. This is about controlling the high ground, literally and strategically. The Tibetan Plateau is the source of Asia's 10 largest rivers. Whoever controls the plateau controls the water for 2 billion people. China has spent 20 years building roads, railways, airports, and power grids across Tibet. Medog is the capstone. It turns the plateau from a remote region into a strategic asset. The electricity goes to Shanghai and Guangzhou, but the leverage stays upstream. Meanwhile, the United States is debating whether to repair a single bridge in Baltimore. Europe is trying to figure out how to fund its energy transition without Russian gas. The gap is not just in capability, it is in ambition, and willingness to attempt the difficult and expensive. That mindset built the Hoover Dam, the interstate highway system, and the Apollo program. By 2035, if the project stays on schedule, the 5 dams will generate 300 billion kilowatt-hours per year. That is more electricity than the entire country of France consumes annually. It will make Tibet a net exporter of energy for the first time. It will reduce China's reliance on coal by a measurable percentage. It will change the economics of aluminum, steel, and chemical production across inland China. It will give Beijing control over water resources affecting hundreds of millions of people in neighboring countries. China has published the numbers. The Medog complex is policy. The West is not responding. Just silence. That silence is a choice that will define the next 50 years of Asian geopolitics, because whoever controls the rivers controls the region. What separates China's approach from the West's is the willingness to think in decades, to treat infrastructure as a strategic asset, to build the thing even when it is hard and expensive. The Panama Canal took 10 years. The Transcontinental Railroad took 6. The interstate highway system took 35. These were not profitable when built. They were profitable 30 years later. China still thinks this way. The rest of the world mostly does not. The gap between those mindsets is now measured in gigawatts. Medog is not the future. Medog is the present. The dams are under construction now. By the time most people in the West hear about it, it will already be generating power. 5 dams, 1 canyon, 60 gigawatts. July 19, 2025, Premier Li Qiang stood in Ningxi and started the countdown on the largest power station the planet has ever seen. The river that carved the deepest canyon in the Himalayas will turn turbines 5 times before it crosses into India. The country that controls the height of the water will control leverage over 2 billion people downstream. The future of energy was decided in a remote Tibetan canyon that most of the West cannot find on a map, and it is already under construction. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next story makes this one look small.